In topic 811, we are talking about sewage treatment. And so, what we're talking about here is how wastewater is treated by homes and municipalities. And so, this wastewater that we're talking about, it's a combination of water along with liquid and solid waste that comes from homes and comes from businesses. Anything that goes down a drain, whether it's a toilet drain, a shower drain, a sink drain, all of that material is what we consider wastewater. And wastewater has some characteristics that, if it were discharged untreated into a body of water, would have negative impacts. You know, there's physical characteristics of wastewater. It can be turbid, it can have off colors, odors, it can have dissolved solids or suspended solids. There are chemical contaminants that might be in that water related to pH or nitrogen or various other metals. There can also be biological contaminants, bacteria, oxygen demanding waste, etc. So all of these things that could be contaminated water, they can be removed through different methods of wastewater treatment. Okay? And so this wastewater that goes down drains, it might have bacteria, it might have nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus or other contaminants. And so the ways of treating it vary. So in some areas, in remote or more rural areas, the drain pipes from a home are not actually connected to a municipal system that allows for wastewater treatment. Okay, the drain pipes, the sewers that connect to buildings, they only go so far away from the sewage treatment plant. And so if you're not connected to those sewer pipes, then the wastewater needs to be treated typically on site. And so that's where septic systems come in. A septic system is basically like a small, simple sewage treatment plant in a yard next to a home. And so the way that septic systems work is pretty simple. So the plumbing, you can see that in this model on the lower left. The material from the home that goes down all the drains is connected to a drain pipe, just like any other house. But this drain pipe leads not eventually to a sewer system, it leads to a septic tank that's buried in the backyard somewhere. Okay? And in this septic tank, there's various chambers. And so the wastewater that comes from the house goes first into the septic tank. And this is where solid material settles out due to gravity. Right? Any suspended solids, any solid waste will sort of sediment to the bottom. And then the liquid, okay, can then move through this septic tank and eventually into what we call a leach field. Okay? And along the way, there are bacteria that will naturally break down some of the organic matter in this waste. And as it percolates through the leach field and into the soil, okay, the natural properties of soil can help to filter and purify that water. And eventually that water percolates down into the groundwater. And so that's how septic tanks work. They need maintenance. Sometimes some certain things can clog up septic tanks. If, as they're used over time, they can fill up with this sludge as more and more of it settles to the bottom. So you might have to have the honey wagon. You may have seen this driving around our area. The honey wagon basically pumps out the solid material from septic tanks so that there's more space for them to continue working. So that's how a septic tank and leach field work. If you live sort of in more central, more urban and suburban areas, it's likely that you are connected to a sewer system. Here's a map that shows our area, and it shows basically the main sewer lines that run through Oneida County, or I guess not all of Oneida County, run through our area. So we can analyze this a little bit. So if you think about, okay, if you are connected to a sewer system and you dump something down the drain, like where does it actually go? And so it eventually ends up here. Okay? This is the wastewater treatment facility. Okay, it's right next to the transfer station for solid waste down here in North Utica on Wirtz Ave. Okay, and you could see this if you drive down Wirtz Ave. You could see this facility. And it's right here. So basically anything in this area, okay, that you see colored in, anything that goes down a drain anywhere in this area is going to end up here at the wastewater treatment plant. How it gets there depends on where you live. For example, I'll use myself for example. I live off of Higbee Road over in this vicinity. Okay, and so anything probably that goes down the drain in my house goes through out of my house into a sewer line that's on Arlington Terrace. Those sewer lines lead eventually down towards Oneida Street, towards this Sequoia Creek interceptor. These interceptors, these red lines, represent different large sewer pipes. And so basically anywhere in this area, all of them have lateral lines that aren't shown on this diagram that leads the waste into this large interceptor line. And so most of New Hartford, the waste empties into this interceptor here. There might be, if you live over near Aldi or Seneca Turnpike, waste might come into the Mud Creek interceptor. There's another one here. But anyway, that all flows basically through the use of gravity down, okay, through various interceptors. They combine and they merge, and eventually over here to the Sequoia Creek pump station. This is pretty low lying, so gravity here, there's not enough force of gravity to continue that waste. So there's a pump station here that will pump that over to the wastewater treatment plant. It goes sort of along Oriskany Street and goes near the train tracks and so forth over to the wastewater treatment plant. We can see the different other areas of our local area have different interceptors, but basically they all work in the same way. They all carry wastewater to the central facility, to the wastewater treatment plant. And then what happens to it there? So all wastewater treatment has sort of a set of steps, and they're pretty consistent from facility to facility. There is some variation. Sometimes there's some variation into what people call primary, secondary, tertiary treatment. But we'll go through the basics of what happens. So as this wastewater comes from all of the sewers, the first step is physical treatment, primary treatment of the water. This is a physical process. So there are screens where the sewer water enters the facility that basically filter out large objects. You know, if a branch gets into that wastewater, large things get screened out in this process here. And then it moves into a primary settling tank. And so the water sits in this tank basically, and then suspended solid material that's still present in the water. It didn't get filtered out by these screens, but as it goes into the sedimentation chamber, basically the solids settle out. Okay, and they are transported, they're removed eventually at various stages along this process. So sedimentation basically clarifies the water somewhat, takes out large particles that are suspended. That water is then transferred to secondary treatment. Secondary treatment uses biological process. So the primary treatment was using physical processes like density and gravity and physical separation by screens and grates. In secondary, we're using the action of bacteria to help treat the water. So in secondary treatment, it's a biological process. So there are bacteria that are present in the water, and oftentimes some of the sludge is put into this secondary treatment to add decomposing bacteria to help break down this material. So in this secondary treatment, what you have is oxygen. Typically there's like an aerator, a bubbler, there's something providing oxygen to the bacteria, and they decompose the organic matter that's in that wastewater. Okay. They release carbon dioxide in the process. This is aerobic decomposition because of the bubbling that is purposely put into the water. And over that aeration, that adding of oxygen helps this material break down more quickly. And so they release some carbon dioxide there, and then that material is moved into another tank for sedimentation to further settle out some of this material. Okay. that's removed as well. And so after secondary treatment of the water, basically this water is much cleaner. There's far less organic matter. There's fewer suspended solids and dissolved solids. Then it can be moved on to the tertiary treatment, and it varies. Tertiary treatment varies depending on the facility. There are ways of removing excess nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, which if that were not removed could lead to eutrophication, because this water is going to end up in a stream, a river, a lake, some body of water. So the nutrients can be removed in many ways. And then there is the disinfection stage. This is when either chlorine is added to this water that's been decontaminated, or sometimes ultraviolet light or ozone is used to basically kill any microbes that might still be present in this wastewater. So some sort of disinfection is put into place, and then eventually that effluent, we call it, the stuff coming out of the wastewater treatment plant, usually is released back into a body of water. Okay, in our area is, I think, the Mohawk River is where the wastewater treatment releases the treated water. And so that's the step. Those are the processes. In Oneida County, here's sort of a model of how we do it in Oneida County. So we have, so ideally also something to mention is that the only thing going to the wastewater treatment plant is sewage, or wastewater from homes from drains. Ideally, stormwater is kept separate from this wastewater, because stormwater is not contaminated in the same way. But if we have combined sewer and stormwater together, it just overwhelms sewage treatment plants' capacity for treatment. And so prior to modern sewers being built, oftentimes the two systems of stormwater collection and wastewater collection were one. But since in more recent times, they have either been separated, and when new infrastructure is built, stormwater and wastewater are hopefully kept completely separate. Stormwater can go through catch basins and eventually just go to a natural source of water. For example, if you have a catch basin outside of our school, when it rains or when the snow melts and water goes down there, it just goes through a pipe and probably ends up right in the Squoit Creek just nearby our school. That water doesn't need to go to a sewage treatment plant. So depends on the locality, but hopefully they're separate. So the sanitary, we could look at the sanitary wastewater treatment. Comes in, goes through screens, again, to remove solid objects, to remove grit. Okay, that's like bits of sand or gravel that might be mixed in with that water. And then it goes to a clarifier, the primary clarifier. This is primary treatment. So where, again, solids will settle out. Okay, that eventually goes through this bottom area where sludge is collected and eventually disposed of. So after primary clarification, basically the water's sitting in these pools, solids are settling out, and then the liquid moves on to secondary treatment. Okay, and this is where air is added. Sludge from the waste is also added to provide those bacteria. And here bacteria are aerobically breaking down organic matter that's in that liquid. It's then moved to secondary clarifiers, where again gravity settles out any solids and other suspended material onto disinfection, okay, which uses chlorine or ultraviolet radiation, and then it's eventually released, effluent. And so that's the overall process of wastewater treatment in our area. So what we see, this top version shows when there is combined stormwater and sewer water, and it overwhelms the capacity of all of this infrastructure, then it can be diverted, and it can go through a primary clarifier and then a disinfectant and then released. But this does not remove as much of that organic matter that would if the plant were operating in this mode. So ideally, you're always operating in this mode, and as we keep stormwater out of wastewater, this can be the more frequent method. The waste, the grit and sludge that is eventually removed from all of this eventually goes to the landfill, okay, and is disposed of there. If we look at our treatment, again, this is an overhead view of wastewater treatment. We can see the clarifying pools. We can see this is the digester, the anaerobic digester that I mentioned when we were talking about the removal of solid waste. We have clarifying ponds and all these things. So that's what the facility actually looks like. It's open, and when you drive by, it doesn't really smell bad in any way. It's an interesting process to remove the harmful material from what we do. And again, here's just a more general model where we have screening of the incoming material, the removal of grit, clarification eventually onto secondary treatment where we aerate, bacteria break down organic matter, eventually chlorinate to disinfect, and eventually that liquid gets passed into as effluent out into the water. The solid parts, the sludge, is disposed of at the landfill. And we can see how effective our wastewater treatment is in Oneida County. This is what comes in from the wastewater. So biochemical oxygen demand, we'll talk about that, suspended material, settleable material, nitrogen, and ammonia. And this is what's coming in the wastewater. And after treatment through this process, this is the levels in the effluent. So again, about 97% of the BOD is removed, 94% of suspended solids, all of the settleable solids. And then the vast majority of the nitrogen is also removed through these processes. And so that water then gets put back into effluent, and the process repeats.